Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Crosby Kemper, the director of the Kansas City Public Library. We're honored to kick off our series with David Von Drehle, with Mike Allen, Dateline Washington, and I'll introduce Mike and David in 1 second. I do want to tell you that parking is free tonight. You don't have to get your tickets stamped. We'll have the gates open. And I do want to mention a couple of upcoming programs. We have a series, an ongoing series. You might have been here for the first one with Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, called Legal Landmarks, that we're doing with the Truman Library Institute, who is also a co-sponsor of tonight's program. On Tuesday, we'll be doing Plessy versus Ferguson with William James Hofer, and that'll be at the Central Library. And also at Central Library on this Thursday, i.e. tomorrow, we have Terry Beckenbaugh, one of our favorite lecturers from Fort Leavenworth from the Command School. We'll be here talking about the Battle of Fort Wagner, and you may know that the Battle of Fort Wagner from the great movie, the Denzel Washington movie, Glory, and it's that story. And we have an excellent Missouri academic, University of Missouri academic, Jonathan Sperber, who's written a book that's one of the best biographies of the last few years, certainly the best biography published so far this year on Karl Marx, a 19th century life. And that's on Thursday, July 25th, also here at the Central Library. And then, oh, good, it's getting louder. And then the last thing I want to mention that's coming up this month, it's not in our calendar because the Kauffman Foundation asked us to do this, and they asked us too late to get it into the calendar, but it'll be an important event. You know, I interviewed Michelle Rhee, the former superintendent of Washington, D.C. schools a few weeks ago, and kind of following up on that, the Kauffman Foundation is bringing to us Kate Walsh, who is the head of the National Council on Teacher Quality. And they have just released a state-by-state report on teacher quality in the United States. And she'll be talking about that at the Plaza Library on July 30th. And I won't give you the bad news about Missouri and Kansas tonight, but we will be talking about it on July 30th. So I do want to thank, before I introduce David and Mike, I do want to thank the Kauffman Foundation, which is the sponsor of most of our programming, and particularly the sponsor of the programs that we do jointly with the Truman Library Institute. And we've done some great programs together. And I do want to thank the Truman Library Institute. Alex Burden, head of the Institute, is here tonight. Alex, wave, you're here somewhere. Mike Devine, Alex is back there. Mike Devine, the director of the Truman Presidential Library, is here. The soon-to-be chairman of the board, I believe, of the Truman Library Institute, John Sherman, is here with us tonight. John, thank you. And we're very grateful for this partnership, for the Kauffman Foundation sponsorship of it. It's been a great series, the presidential series, the Beyond the Gowns First Ladies series, and now the Legal Landmarks series. And you know, we'll obviously continue with people who tried to be president and couldn't be president, the vice presidents, people who dreamt as children about being president. We're going to keep this going as long as we can. But this series, Dateline Washington with David Von Drehle, is a very special series, and so we're really honored to have Mike Allen of Politico here as David's first guest. Mike Allen, as I discovered in reading the New York Times Magazine article about him, the White House wakes up. When they wake up, the first thing they do is they go and they read Mike Allen's blog, Playbook, on Politico. But I discovered even further than that in reading this, that the White House communications director, when he goes to bed at night around midnight, the last thing he does is he calls Mike Allen to find, and I'm not sure if who's telling whom what the news is, but anyway, that's the last. And then at 4:20 in the morning, this is actually in the article, when he gets up, the White House communications director calls Mike Allen. Now, which means Mike Allen got up at least at 3:20 this morning, our time, so we'll see what happens. The article called him a hyperactive Boy Scout, but it said the summer camp newsletter, Playbook, that's the way they described it, his blog on Politico, is the most read political news in America. He's become the go-to person for politics in this country, from the White House to those of us as I do. Well, I won't show it to you, but I have my little icon here on my iPad. He's written for the Washington Post and the Richmond Times-Dispatch, and is America's consummate political journalist. But he will be interviewed by David Von Drehle, America's other consummate political journalist. Now, David is now at Kansas City, and I need to tell you the story of how David got here to Kansas City. David was the New York correspondent for the Washington Post, and his wife, Karen Ball, was the White House correspondent for the New York Daily News. So think about that for a while. Anyway, and they met in a car accident at the Millicent Fenwick stop on the New Jersey Turnpike. That's entirely invented. But they decided, as they were having a large family, that they couldn't live in Washington, so they filled their mommy van up with gas, and when they ran out of gas in Raytown, they stopped and decided to live in Kansas City. But David, like Mike Allen, has had a storied career in American journalism. His first editorial job was editor of the student newspaper, the Denver Clarion. He graduated from the University of Denver. At the age of 17, he was the youngest sports writer for the Denver Post. Moved on to the Miami Herald. In the meantime, after graduating from the University of Denver, he got a Marshall Scholarship to Oxford. At the Miami Herald, he won the Livingston Award for Young Journalists. He eventually won the American Bar Association Silver Gavel Award, the American Society of News Editors Distinguished Writing Award. He's the national correspondent, roving editor for Time magazine, has written the cover stories on President Obama's Man of the Year, on Glenn Beck, and many others, Chief Justice Roberts, et cetera. We had him here in the library a little while ago talking about his wonderful book. It made some top 10 lists last year, including mine, by the way, on Rise to Greatness about Abraham Lincoln. And after the event, Henry Fortunato was talking to David about his move from Washington to Kansas City and about national journalism. And Henry, of course, is from Washington, an old Washington journalist himself. And they concocted this series, Dateline Washington, in which David will be bringing some of his colleagues and friends from Washington and elsewhere in the journalism world to the Kansas City Public Library, and what we think will be one of the most special series that we've ever done, and which we're doing in association with the Truman Library and the Truman Library Institute. So, ladies and gentlemen, would you welcome, please, David Von Drehle and Mike Allen.
These are really comfy chairs. So if
I promise to keep you awake.
I wasn't up at 3:20 with Mike this morning, but it was close. So if I nod off, Mike will carry the day. Thank you all very much for coming out. This is our test drive for this program, Dateline Washington, and so we're going to get the bugs out with y'all. You can give us feedback later. Let's save it for afterwards, though.
Unless it's good.
No fruit thrown. I would like to thank Crosby for that great introduction. What a wonderful resource he is for our community to and his impresario. Well, speaking of bugs and glitches.
They told you, turn off your phone.
Turn off your phone. Henry Fortunato, the impresario of the Kansas City Public Library. and everyone on the staff and the Truman Library Institute, the Kauffman Foundation, and without further ado, Washington's town crier, he's been called. You heard he's the man the White House wakes up to. Mike said this of himself: I get that what I do is a little ambiguous, but I try to be a force for good, and I try to be everywhere. Everyone in Washington knows that he's successful at part two. He is everywhere. And those of us who know him well know him to be a very great force for good. He's known for his kindness, his sincerity, his concern. These are not qualities that are typically associated with Washington journalism. I understand that, and I'm not going to complain. But I will say that I've had the great good fortune to serve at close hand with the two most influential political journalists of their generations, David Broder and now Mike Allen. And I will say that to get to the very top, you have to be a person of impeccable character, dignity, fairness, and consideration. And those are qualities that David had and that Mike has. I think, in fact, of him, although he's born on the West Coast and now lives on the East Coast, as having the soul and manners of a Midwesterner. And so we're glad to invite him and welcome him here today. The Playbook, which Crosby referred to, is not Mike's only creation, but it is his signature creation. A mass email that goes out every morning to several thousand, I would think, of the top people in media, in politics, in business around the country, in Hollywood. I think they're very close readers of the Playbook. It is hard to describe. It's a mixture of everything from the top news of the day, what we should look forward to in the day ahead, to the announcements of whose uncles and aunts are visiting Washington that day, and of course birthdays, ranging, for example, from today's Playbook. We learned that it was the birthday of the EPA's White House liaison, someone I haven't had the pleasure to meet yet. And I'm concerned that the EPA needs a White House liaison. I thought they were on the same team. To the fact that David Hasselhoff of Baywatch is 61 years old today. Mike, why don't you explain what the idea of the Playbook is, its genesis, how you produce it, and why?
Well, David, thank you very much for those kind comments. And first, what a treat and honor it is to be here. I've had a great time yesterday and today wandering around, seeing the amazing renovated downtown, getting to enjoy and experience so much of what's here. And don't tell my mother, but I've now had barbecue 3 meals in a row. So my barbecue breakfast was very enjoyable. And I wanted to real quickly thank Crosby Kemper for those kind comments and say what a great time I've had here, getting to know some of the people from and recognize the amazing programs of the Truman Library Institute and the Kansas City Public Library, especially here in this amazing Central Library, and to thank the Ewing Marion Kauffman Foundation Legacy Fund for making this possible, and you for coming out. A lot of people here were early, and you for coming out on this hot day. So the Playbook started with 2 subscribers, my bosses. When Politico started 7 years ago, my bosses, the founders, John Harris and Jim Vandehei, both of whom we'd worked together at the Washington, all of us had worked together at the Washington Post. I sent them an email that said what was going to happen that day and what we should cover and what we'd missed and what our competitors were doing, and a little gossip so that they would read it. And what happened to Playbook shows a little bit about where all media is heading, which is why I think this is going to be very, this is instructive. Playbook was one of the first viral products. If we had Politico, which was then a couple weeks old, if we had gone to some of the busiest people in the world, including David, including my friend Don Trigg there in the back, and said, I want you to read something else in the morning. They would have said, you're on drugs, forget it. And it would have been a total flop. But instead, what we did, and following the Obama campaign, secret sauce, a lot of corporations are going to be moving toward this. We started with 2 people, and then 3. John Harris was talking to Howard Wolfson, who then was the communicator for Senator Clinton's presidential campaign. And he's now a deputy mayor in New York. And he said, Mikey sends me this great email in the morning, and Howard asked for it, and then Howard's deputy asked for it, and then the Obama campaign asked for it, and then the RNC, and then the DNC, and then the White House, and then various media people. And it was a personal thing. It never occurred to us that this was something that people would sign up for, or that would be a product, or that would be an app. And so I personally forwarded individually to all those people. It took me a half hour just to forward all the emails, because I figured it should be personal, that people wouldn't want a BCC. And so after a while I wrote to them and said, it's going to be BCC, but you'll get it half an hour earlier. But the point of that is, it's personal. It's an email to my friends. And the people who are at the core of the Playbook community, the Playbook audience, are all people that I talk to, people who I know what they want, I know what they're interested in. And so the biggest thing about Playbook, to answer your question, long-winded way, is that it's what people are going to be talking about, not what's necessarily important to them. If it's important enough to you, you probably already know about it now through Facebook or through email. We want to tell you something that you don't know and teach you something that will surprise you as you start your day. We read 1,000 articles and try and find the 10 that you'll be interested in.
Does the President of the United States read Playbook?
Sometimes with a smile, sometimes not. This president consumes a ton of information on his iPad, and we know from some of the responses that we've got that we get that he does read Playbook and sometimes enjoy Playbook, sometimes not enjoy it so much. What's very fascinating one of the fascinating things about President Obama is he is the first president in our lifetimes who read information on his own that his staff didn't know about. When Don was in the Bush White House and when other living presidents were around, they all got their news from briefings and from news summaries. And so the staff kind of controlled what they knew and could leave out things that they thought would like flummox them or upset them or that they thought wasn't right or shouldn't see. But this president, because he stays up late after the First Lady, the daughters are asleep, he's a night owl, he stays up late surfing his iPad, and he sees a lot that his staff hasn't. And they've told me that they have some unpleasant moments sometimes when he sees something that's important to him that should be, and therefore is important to them, that they've missed.
What about the Chief Justice? Is he on your list?
He should be.
He should be. Speaker of the House on your list?
The Speaker of the House is not a big email guy, but does read Playbook. I think they might print it for him. Well, listen to this. You'll like this. So Warren Buffett, this is what's great
I was
about...
about to ask about Warren Buffett.
Okay.
He's right here on my...
This is what's great about being rich, or it's one of the great things. Warren Buffett doesn't do email, but luckily he does read the Playbook. And he has someone who in the morning not just prints Playbook for him. There's a lot of people, there's a few people still not on email. I did a Playbook breakfast, a conversation like this yesterday or 2 days ago with the Major League Baseball commissioner, Bud Selig. He's never sent an email in his life, not once. So there's a lot of people who have emails printed for them. Warren Buffett, they print Playbook for him, and then everything that's linked to it, they print it out in case he wants to see it. That's one of the great things about being Warren Buffett. It's right there.
A 19th century link. Buffett is a great political gossip guy, as you know. When we were both at the Post, I don't know if you did this, but I was sent up once during a board of directors meeting to tell them about a trip to cover politics I had done. And I was getting ready to sit down at the lunch table, and the man next to me held out his hand and said, "Hi, I'm Warren Buffett." And I said, "Yes, I know that." And he asked me what I did. I said I was a national political correspondent for the Post. He said, if I could have any other job in the world, I'd like to have your job. And I said, you know, that's funny, because
Any other job, that's the world's biggest asterisk. Yes.
let's talk a little bit about Politico. 7 years ago, it didn't exist. Today, some people call it the most influential news organization in Washington, D.C. You are employee number 3, probably close to it. Tell us how it was created, how you did it, what the idea was, and where it's headed.
Yeah, thank you. And the story of Politico will be the story of media in America. And this is why I think you will be fascinated with our story. 7 years ago, I mentioned John Harris and Jim Vandehei, who saw the future in a way that I didn't, had an idea, and were kind enough to take me along on this amazing ride. And 7 years ago, their idea was that pretty soon we would be using the web very much the way we use TV. And that is 7 years ago, you'll remember, we'd wake up and we'd spend 20 minutes with the Kansas City Star, or 20 minutes with the Miami Herald, or the Washington Post, or nytimes.com, or wherever our go-to place for news was. And their idea was that very quickly we would start to use the web and surf around. And instead of spending 20 minutes on kansascitystar.com, that we would get up and get a stock quote from CNBC.com and a forecast from weather.com and maybe some gossip from TMZ.com. And what Politico wanted to do, their idea for Politico was that if we created a site about public life, about governing, and about campaigns and elections, that people would make that one stop. So we were never going to be the go-to place for everything. We don't cover the Redskins. We don't cover dining, even though I think that we should. We should definitely have a barbecue beat with a nice travel budget. But we're never going to be those things. We want to be the best at the single thing that we do, and to become one stop. Now this shows how fast media is coming. Like, luckily that was true then, and that theory worked. But the web, and the web is changing so fast that you've never really cracked the code. As soon as you figure something out, you have to figure out something new. So at that time, we got people in the habit of coming to Politico.com. But now, you don't get any automatic eyeballs. When we were growing up, we read the Orange County Register and the LA Times because they were in the driveway. And we watched the Channel 4 News because our dad turned it on. And it didn't really matter if it served us or if it was good. It was in the driveway, so we read it, it was on, so we watched it. But now, everyone in this room has so many choices that we don't get any automatic eyeballs like that. We can't count on your coming to, even coming to our homepage, Politico. So we have to find you. We have to serve you in a way that every morning you're going to want to come to us or welcome us into your bedroom or your kitchen or wherever you are at 420, 320 local. And what we tell our young reporters about is what I call the nightclub theory. And the nightclub theory is that when a club is hot, everyone goes there because everyone goes there. And Politico's blessed to be in that place right now. But you guys know this, that 6 months later, nothing has changed about a club, but nobody goes there because nobody goes there. And so what we tell our young reporters is, you don't want to be Studio 54. And the young reporters are like, what's Studio 54? But things change that quickly. And so every morning, we have a chance to either win you over or lose you. Now, what's next? To answer David's question, we're very focused on how do we serve you better on your mobile devices. Right now, more than 25% of our traffic comes to us through mobile devices. We think it'll be over 50% in a year. And that has a profound effect on how we tell stories, how we communicate stories. We did an ebook about the presidential campaign that on an iPhone is 3,000 screens. I think maybe my mother would scroll through that, but not anyone in this room. So in a world where people are consuming things on their iPhone or their iPad, we have to figure out a different way, a friendlier way to tell stories. Also, advertising is going down as a central revenue driver for media sites, and subscription revenue is increasing. How do we adapt to that? So those are all questions that other media organizations are thrashing out. A sort of leading indicator of this, some of you know the New York Times digital bundle doesn't include the crossword. You pay for the crossword separately. They just announced that they're going to do a separate dining product that you pay for. And so those are some of the changes that we're wrestling with and that other news organizations are.
Now, the criticism of Politico is
Oh,
that
come on.
you generate...
In an interview, like, you have to wait for a while. Like, this is too soon. You
Too
save
soon
the
for the
bad stuff for
criticism?
the
Okay,
end.
I'll save it for later. No, but I may never get back to it.
I'm just surprised we have critics. This is the
you're-
first I've heard of this.
You're so charming that, that I might be swayed against asking. You produce so much copy. You want something fresh every time your customers, your readers, your audience go to the site. And you
Guilty
want
as
them
charged.
to go to the site over and over
Yes,
again.
yes.
And you are so influential, you especially, but also the site, in driving the day, winning the day, I believe is...
Win the morning, drive the day.
Win the morning, drive the day is the slogan. You want all of news coverage to be following Politico's lead, and that sometimes you take us down the silly street. A reasonable charge, or...
Yeah, no, so just to, it's a reasonable question, how's that? And just to unpack what David has said, people who criticize Politico say that we do too much of one thing or another, and it's because we do a lot of everything. And so if you like we're completely nonpartisan, partly because of the background that we come from, like David, we come out of traditional mainstream media where we're down the middle. Also, as our business model, we're there to serve both sides. So we work with Republicans, we fight with Republicans. We work with Democrats, we fight with Democrats. And so we're there to serve both sides and also to be tough on both sides, to act as the referee. And sometimes things in Washington look a little like Silly Street, as David would say, and we cover those. There's a lot of very serious things going on in DC, and we cover those too. Every day our site starts with a lead story that's original. It's at least 1,200 words, very serious, very thought out. We now are investing millions in a new product a new part of Politico to be headed by Susan Glasser, who we just recruited from Foreign Policy magazine, to do more opinion journalism, more long-form journalism, more foreign policy journalism. Those were all areas that we saw room for improvement, and we want to get better. We're 7 years old, so we have a ways to go. We've been blessed to go from 2 people to 3 people to, we had 35 when we launched. We have 250 people today. We'll have 300 at the end of the year, and all of that growth is in what the people in this room would consider serious, in-depth journalism, not, as David said, Silly Street, or as some have said, snowflakes.
Snowflakes that melt before they hit the ground. That's a good...
But they taste good on your tongue.
Taste good on your tongue. So reports of the death of media are greatly exaggerated. If you've gone from 35 to 300 in 6 years.
We are bullish. I don't want to interrupt, but I'm just so excited about this. I told Steve on his radio show earlier today that one of my little expressions is every morning is Christmas morning because we cover such exciting times, and Politico is unbelievably bullish about media. I spend a lot of time talking to journalism students, young reporters, and our message to them always, there has never been a better time in media, and here's why. There's definitely tough financial times for institutions that we both love and have worked for, but more people are consuming more information more often, in more ways, in more places than ever, and that's largely because of mobile, and that means that it's a great time to have a story to tell. It's a great time to be working in media. One thing
that motivated you very much the day we met, you won't remember this, but I do. I was an editor at the Washington Post for a few years before they caught me and sent me back And one day, there was a tradition there that when candidates were interviewing for other departments, someone from a totally different department would have to interview that person.
Have to.
Have to. And usually they sent the University of Maryland lacrosse candidates over to my office, but one day the Metro desk, right, sent over a young reporter from Richmond, and we talked. And I was, of course, very, very impressed by your energy and your love for a scoop. You love to break a story, and you still do. You had a good one this week. The immigration bill, which we'd been hearing about, the bipartisan campaign to pass the immigration bill, you tell us it is dead. Headed to a slow death, I believe is the direct quote.
It's dead. It will be dead.
Tell us how you got that scoop and why that's the case.
Yeah. So one of the ideas that John Harris and Jim Van de Heye had when they started Politico was that reporters, and I think David and I will both plead guilty to this, each plead guilty to it, someone in this room probably knows the answer to that, we'll both plead guilty to this, and that is reporters are a lot more interesting if you run into them in a bar or at a Little League game than they are in the paper. Yes. And our idea was that you shouldn't have to play bridge or Little League with a reporter to know what's really going on. And so what Politico tries to do, and we have not achieved this is something we're constantly working for, is to close the gap between what's in our reporters' heads and what is on the site, in the print paper, or on TV, or on radio, or on a podcast, or however you want to get us. And one thing that we've just started to do in the last few months is my boss, Jim Van de Heye, and I do a column called Behind the Curtain. And the idea is to take more of what we know and what we hear and make sure that it's on the site. And if you were to read most of the media coverage, it would sound like the House was thrashing out an immigration bill that eventually would be married up with the bill that the Senate has passed, and something would head to the president eventually for his signature. And the idea behind that was that there is such an incentive for the Republican Party to pass immigration. What top people in the party will tell you is that in no way is an immigration bill a silver bullet for Republicans with Hispanics. But what it is what they call a gateway, that if you could get that off the table, if Republicans would show that they would pass a real immigration bill, that there's a lot of persuadable Hispanic voters who would listen to the Republican message on other topics, whether it's a small business message, a taxation message, an entrepreneurial message, a traditional values message. But with many of those voters, focus group after focus group shows that while the Republican Party looks intransigent on this issue, that it's going to be hard to reach those voters. And President Bush, Karl Rove, Karen Hughes, that crowd were onto this, Mike Gerson, they were all onto this in 1999. They all understood this, and that dynamic is still true. So there's this huge incentive for Republicans to do it, and the huge incentive for Democrats to do it is it's not clear what other big accomplishment this president will have in his second term if he's not signing immigration. We had an astonishing quote in Politico today that some of you saw. Glenn Thrush did a great article about how when the president during the campaign had said, "Re-elect me and we'll break the fever in Washington," that he never believed that, that they knew that they were facing 4 more years of gridlock. And Glenn Thrush has a great quote in there from an advisor, very close advisor to President Obama, who said that the reason they were saying the thing about if you re-elect us and you'll break the partisan fever in Washington, they said that the slogan, 4 more years of the same old stuff, and they didn't say stuff, probably wouldn't have been as effective a slogan. So they had to say something. But now, and this was the amazing quote in that story, David Gergen was saying, you know, you're reelected, you have 48 months, and yet this president already seems to have the wind out of his sails. And so that's how he needs immigration. So there's these huge incentives for both sides. But what we realized from talking to House Republicans who are going to have to vote on this is that they're not going to vote for this, that there's nothing that even resembles either what the Senate has passed or what anyone in this room would consider comprehensive immigration reform that's going to pass. And there's a simple reason why. My favorite stat, and this comes from the Cook Political report, they figured out that of the 234 House Republicans who were elected on Election Day, November 6th, 234 House Republicans, 15 of them are from districts that President Obama won. There's only 15 crossover districts among House Republicans. So they don't have the incentive that the media assumes that they do. Like, all politics is local, and they're thinking about what they're hearing back home. So we did a story that spelled out, based on our reporting at the very top levels of the House, very top levels of the Senate, the White House, that said that the people who are most involved now believe that immigration is going to die. And we say, as David said, that it's a slow death because Republicans are going to have some votes on it. They're going to do maybe one part of it in September, maybe some border security, maybe October, come back and do another no-brainer element to it. For instance, the visa system where you would track the people who leave. But that's probably it. And it's going to be pushed, the rest of it's going to be pushed into November, December. It's when they're dealing with the debt ceiling. Once again, we're going to have this crazy rush at the end, which means the next several months are going to be mostly wasted on Capitol Hill.
We'll touch on that a little bit more, but since you brought up President Obama, let's talk a little bit about him. November is, 8 months ago, something like that. Barack Obama was elected the first Democrat since Franklin Roosevelt to win over 50% of the popular vote 2 elections in a row. Now, does he still live and work in Washington? We don't hear much about him. What's happened, and how does he get his mojo back?
Well, I mean, the president will tell you that he never lost his mojo, that he recognized that this was going to be, that working Washington now in such a close partisan environment was going to be very difficult. The main light bulb that has hit the Obama people since they came to Washington to change Washington, and they realize now that what they ultimately will be judged on is how they worked Washington. Can you finesse what you have? And what the president has on Capitol Hill is a group that doesn't have an incentive to work with him, that doesn't like working with him, that doesn't feel a personal connection with him. It's very much a Mars and Venus situation. This president did not do as much as he could have in the first term to court the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue. Bob Woodward did a book on the failed effort to get the last failed effort to get a grand bargain, The Price of Politics, which had great Woodward-esque in the room, behind the scenes, fly on the wall type scenes. And the most fascinating nugget in that book is that on election night 2010, when Minority Leader John Boehner was about to become Speaker John Boehner, because the Republicans had taken control of the House, someone in the West Wing said to the president, you know, we should probably call John Boehner. And do you know what? There was no one in the West Wing that had John Boehner's cell phone number. And that said it all about their congressional relations. And so now they're trying to fix that, and the current Chief of Staff, Dennis McDonough, is doing a lot from this White House to reach out. He's the one that was behind those dinners they had with the Republican senators. He goes to members' offices on Capitol Hill. They're hearing much more from this White House than they ever had. But this is, like its predecessor, a very insular White House. One of the most fascinating paragraphs that's ever been written about this administration was written by James Fallows, who did an interview or was writing about the former Chief of Staff, Bill Daley from Illinois, who's now running for governor there. And it doesn't quote Bill Daley, but it quotes people very close to his thinking, if you know what we mean. And it's clear that Bill Daley told this story to James Fallows, and here's what it is. When Bill Daley came into the White House to succeed Rahm Emanuel as the Chief of Staff, he looked around at what was going to be needed. And he went to the president and he said, the staff that you have around you was great in Iowa and for the campaign, and they clearly have delivered, gotten you here. But now we need to bring in some fresh blood. We need some new ideas. We need some new staff. The president said he would think about that. And the next day, next meeting where he saw Bill Daley, according to a person quite familiar with the thinking of Bill Daley, the president said, oh, and by the way, I like my staff. And at that moment, Bill Daley was never really the chief of staff again, because he knew that he couldn't get the staff in there that he wanted. He couldn't persuade the president, and the president was going to stick with the system he had. And you have to give them credit. Like this, the people around him have accomplished amazing things, both politically with these 2 re-elections, under 2 totally different theories of the case. And this is part of the political genius of the Obama team. His first campaign was run on one of the most optimistic, sort of broad strategies, hope and change, that you could think to have. This time, he won with one of the most surgical strategies that you could have. They figured out every last vote that they would need, and they turned them out. And then on the legislative side, to have accomplished both healthcare reform and finance reform, things that people have been trying to do for decades, this president signed both of those, both astonishing accomplishments. And so he feels pretty good about his team, but that also makes it tough for the people at the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue. And what he would tell you about them is, look, I tried to deal with those guys in the first term. John Boehner can't control his own caucus. He can't make a deal that he can deliver on. And so I'm going to go around them. I'm going to talk to the country. I'm going to talk to rank and file Republicans. And that's why you have this frustration in the 2 buildings.
So the first term, his goal clearly was deal with a crashing economy and
save the world. And they saved the world economy. And it's a little tough to then say, but of course, that's what we're there for.
That's it. We'll save that for, there's a lot to unpack there. But then to deliver on a half-century-long Democratic Party dream of health care for all, which they now in the second term are going to try to stand up, and we're all watching with curiosity as that unfolds. If they were to get, if these dinners that they're having, if Dennis McDonough's visits to congressional offices are successful, what do you think their number 1 goal is for a second term?
Beats me. And I will tell you, during the campaign, I thought they were keeping a secret. And so the day after the election, I saw Valerie Jarrett, and I said, okay, you can tell me now. But we're still waiting. And it's partly a function of the fact that they knew that this was not a Congress that they could count on to pass a lot. So to give you a more serious answer, the president certainly plans to do real things with climate. He made that clear in his inaugural address. He wants to work with leaders abroad to reduce nuclear stocks abroad, continue to improve America's image abroad. What all those things have in common is that they don't require congressional passage, congressional approval. So this president is going to do what he can, both using administrative muscle, the power of his office, his personal power as one of the most amazing and gifted communicators in the history of our country, in anyone's lifetime, to get some things done. And this interesting story that's up on Politico right now by Glenn Thrush and Crosby, thank you for having our app on your iPad. The story that's up there right now, he says that when the president met with his team right after Election Day, he said, don't be confined to what politics can do, or don't depend on Capitol Hill. Let's figure out an agenda that we can do without them. And so that's what we're going to hear a lot from this president, and also implementing for the ages the things that they passed before. So the confirmation yesterday of Richard Cordray to head the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, a key part of the financial regulatory bill, Dodd-Frank. So it's a part that would have been, a lot of people wanted taken out. This president fought to keep in. And you talked about standing up, implementing Obamacare. The staff recognizes that whatever the press says today or tomorrow, that what's going to matter 4 years ago, 10 years from now, 100 years ago, is that they get those things right. And so that's what you're going to see them focusing a lot on.
The impression that we get sometimes out here in what you're
America.
nice enough to call America is that there's a third party that you're not discussing in Washington that has the real power, a permanent party of interests. Some of them are government interests. Feature of Playbook is what you call the Playbook facts of life, where you sometimes interject your own wisdom into your summary of stories to point out the
Reality.
The reality. And this morning you pointed out on a very interesting story about the Pentagon's lobbying efforts and how they kind of have a head start since they actually have offices for their lobbyists in the Capitol. You said
And they are the military. Like that's a big,
you said
that's a pretty good calling
the
card.
fact of life is that the Pentagon is always going to get 90% of what it wants in any conversation. And there are other interests that seem to get 90 to 100% of what they want. Has our democracy, have our political parties really just become an adjunct of this permanent class of what's now the richest city in America, 7 of the 10 wealthiest zip codes in the United States, right in Washington, D.C.? How do you feel about that as the person who has your finger on the pulse of all 3 parties?
Well, as a representative of America, let me ask you, like you've written about this as long as I have, like what's your view of that?
My view is that Bob Woodward got the greatest quote on Washington ever when he reported that Deep Throat, who we later learned was Mark Felt, said, "Follow the money." It applied to the Watergate scandal and to every other story in Washington that I ever covered. And there's just more and more of it with each passing year. And what I've found is that the great genius of the Washington economy is that they succeed on when stuff needs to be done, like fighting the war on terror. That was, 9/11, a tragedy for the country, great for the Washington economy. And we've now seen in recent years that they also thrive in times of gridlock when nothing's happening because they are paid to make sure nothing happens. So
We're paid anyway, at least, yeah.
is it a rigged game?
Yeah, so just to take what David said for a second about 9/11 and the security buildup, this is sobering. We had the CEO of one of the world's biggest defense companies, and therefore one of the country's biggest defense contractors, come into Politico to do a roundtable with some of our defense reporters. And I asked this CEO, in a time of withdrawal in the wars, a time of sequester, which definitely has affected the Pentagon, a time when clearly the government's not going to, there isn't going to be big growth, there isn't the money for that. You already have your 9/11 security buildup. What is going to be next? How does a defense company grow in that environment? What's the next 9/11? And somebody in this room will know the answer to that. What do you think she said? Cyber. She said there's going to be a cyber attack. Somebody's going to attack a utility, or there's going to be something high profile that then is going to cause a lot of hardening by government and by the private sector. So that's sobering, but the point is that outside Washington will remain the way it is. And I wouldn't, and I know you wouldn't either, I wouldn't say that this third party is more important than the other two, but it certainly deserves as much scrutiny. It's not as easy to cover. It's not something that's in front of your face. And that's why an organization like Politico or David's organization, Time Magazine, organizations that invest in knowledgeable, experienced reporters, real journalism, have the resources to spend time to really dig into these things are so valuable, because these are entities that by and large don't want to be written about, but you're right. They affect our lives and they affect what's happening on the stage in front of us.
I want to get to some questions from the audience, so let's go to the lightning round, and let's do some politics. 2014. Chance that the House would go to the Democrats? 0 to 100?
More zero-ish.
Zero-ish?
I think it would be hard for, and the experts that we talked to think it would be hard for Democrats to take the House before redistricting again in 2020. Both sides will tell you that they expect that to stay the way it is.
Chance Republicans will take the Senate.
But do you
I don't disagree with that.
Okay.
Republicans take the Senate. What's the chance?
It's better, right? There would need to be a net change of 6 seats in the Senate, which is a lot when probably roughly only a third of the Senate is up. The fact that the Democrat, who looked like a very strong candidate in Montana, Brian Schweitzer, former governor, populist guy, very popular with the press, with the, how's that for a Freudian slip? Very popular with the left, had pushed for sort of a liberal brand of health reform. He looked like a very strong candidate, looked like that might be a Democratic win in a pretty red state. Now both sides will tell you much better chance of a Republican pickup there. So it still is a situation, they have to get a few more strong candidates. They still have some recruiting issues. They still would almost need to run the table among the close races. It could be done. It's still not likely. Do you agree with that?
Yes. I'm at least doing the lightning round. Oh, that was good.
Touche.
Liz Cheney this morning, the former vice president's daughter, announces a primary challenge against the popular Republican in Wyoming. So that's a juicy story, all except the part about in Wyoming. Is she going to win that?
You see, after you tease me, I should say yes or no, but I can't do that. It's going to be hard. I take former Senator Alan Simpson as a real barometer of where things are headed in that state. And he told Jonathan Martin, now of the New York Times, formerly of Politico, that a primary between Senator Enzi and Liz Cheney would be a disaster, was the word he used for the party. So it's going to be ugly. That made me realize she's going to have a very uphill fight. Senator Enzi said right away he's running again. He's not giving up at all. The National Party, including the National Republican Senatorial Committee, will be behind Enzi. So this is, as the Casper, Wyoming paper said, as quoted in Playbook today, that there will now be a dogfight for money in support in Wyoming. Long shots come in. That's why people go to the races. Marco Rubio was not supposed to win in Florida. Ted Cruz was not supposed to win in Texas. There are upsets in these primaries. It will be tough.
We'll get to Marco Rubio in just a second as we move to 2016. Is Secretary...
No. How's that? Or actually, yes, I run a political site, so yes is what I should say.
Will Secretary, former First Lady Hillary Clinton, Senator Clinton, run for the Democratic nomination? And if so, can anyone beat her?
There's not a single sign she will not run. And sure.
Who is that
See,
someone?
I'm getting better, right?
You are? That was good. And that someone is the Vice President?
Yeah, I think what we're going to see, one of my little expressions is that what's good for the press is bad for America and vice versa. And one of the things the press would love would be to see a knockdown, drag-out primary between the vice president and the former Secretary of State. That's not going to happen. What's going to happen is that both Secretary Clinton and Vice President Biden will build organizations. They'll test what's happening. And I think there'll come a point where it'll be clear which one of them is in a better position to defend the Obama legacy, to excite a new generation of Democrats. And that's the person that will run. The people that we talk to just don't see them going head to head, but they both will try.
On the Republican side, that's going to, I think, once again be our more crowded, populated field. And you've written about Marco Rubio this week, so why don't you start by handicapping his chances, and then venture over to Rand Paul, and then touch on Jeb Bush and Sarah Palin, and anyone else you want to mention.
All right. David accuses Politico of writing about snowflakes or whatever you call them, and you asked me about Sarah Palin? I rest my case. So just to do them in reverse order, Rand Paul, I think people will agree, in this room will agree, has had a fantastic couple months. You talk to people in Washington, there are people at the top of the party who will say that Rand Paul is the favorite at this point. And they're not saying that's who they want, but they're saying that he has a very good chance of getting the nomination. He really connected, politics, like sports, is about moments. And his filibuster was a great moment. It was very skillfully done, showed he has a great instinct. He has his father's organization. He doesn't quite have his father's foreign policy, so that's a good combination. And so he looks like he's in a very strong position. Senator Marco Rubio, the other person you mentioned was Jeb Bush. There are not, and there's people in this room who may know better than I, at the moment, there are not indications that Governor Jeb Bush is going to run, but who knows? And he might look at the field and say, why not? He would be if he ran, he would be the instant favorite. I don't think there's a lot of people in the party who expect that to happen. Is that congruent with what you hear and think?
Yes and yes, and I think it's impossible that we would see Governor Bush and Senator Rubio run because they're so closely connected.
Yeah, I think that's right. And then to answer about Senator Marco Rubio, if you haven't seen him speak in person, is an amazingly gifted communicator. He'll speak for an hour, very substantively, no notes. He did a Playbook breakfast with us, no notes, talked on an amazing range of subjects. Someone pointed out to me that on immigration, you can argue that Senator Rubio wins either way, that if the president signs immigration, he'll have this amazing accomplishment as a first-term senator. And if the Republican Party sinks immigration again, that the only way they could possibly win would be with Marco Rubio as their nominee.
Very good. Here's a microphone. Let's have people who have questions line up there. And while we're doing that, let me ask you a couple of personal questions. 2,000 emails a day, is that true? And do you count them?
I get a lot of email, but I always get one fewer than I would like. There's always one great tidbit, one fact out there, one reader that I could connect with. So I'd always love to have one more email.
And give us this story, which I heard you tell Steve Kraske this morning.
So I better make it
Make it a little different for those people who are listening to Steve's show tomorrow when you're.
And by the way, tune in at noon, right?
11 a.m. KCUR 89.3 on your radio dial,
11.
or available on podcast, I believe, at Up to Date. As a young reporter, you were.
Wait, you're suggesting that I'm not a young reporter?
As a younger reporter, you were covering a trial in Richmond for both the Richmond paper and as a stringer for the New York Times, rushing to a payphone and hit by a car. True?
True.
And you filed to both papers before you went and had your broken elbow examined.
Well, of course. And my trainer now says that it's because of my crooked elbow that I have all the shoulder problems that I do. But yeah, so some of the people in the room are going payphone, but yes, that was where I was going, and that did happen. And one of the exciting things about being a reporter, I've had, I think, 7 jobs. Every single job that I had, I could do for the rest of my life and be totally happy, because being a reporter doesn't matter if you're covering the King George City Council. They didn't have a city council, the King George School Board, which was my first job, or if you're covering the President of the United States. It's a fascinating privilege and always excited and well worth getting hit by a car for.
A question.
Yes. You said something that really set me off a little bit. You feel that either the Secretary of State or the Vice President will be running in support of the Obama legacy. And when I think of the legacy, I think of the establishment of a surveillance state. I think of almost a complete disregard of the Fourth Amendment, of a president who claims I can assassinate any American at any time of my choosing with no defense involved. So I don't understand when you say that they are going to run on a legacy of the Obama administration, and I'd like you to expand on that for me.
Maybe I mumbled, excellent question, sir, and maybe I mumbled. What I said was they'd be running from the legacy. Didn't you hear me say that? No, I think you make good points, and the point is they will be responsible for it. They will be asked about it. They have to defend it no matter how they feel about it.
Because they were both key figures
They were there.
in the administration.
First, let me say a couple days early, Happy Friday.
Oh, awesome. Thank you very much.
And would you say
It's a Morning Joe viewer, or,
Oh,
as,
yeah.
or as we call it, Morning Mika.
when you were talking about Republicans, you didn't talk about Chris Christie. I would like.
Oh, and we should have. What I meant, we should have. You should have.
That was your fault.
No, you gave
I
a list.
said, and any others you would like to mention.
You're welcome.
I'm glad. No, thank you. No, thank you. I'm glad you brought that up. I think Governor Christie is going to be, and this is different from what a lot of my colleagues would tell you. I think Governor Christie is going to be a serious, popular candidate. I don't know how long he's going to last. It's possible that he will have a short shelf life, but he will have his day. There will be a period when he is seen as the front runner. Every indication is that he does want to run, and his sort of plain spokenness, his being outside Washington is very big. Most of those people that we talked about are inside Washington. His being outside Washington is a huge deal in the current environment. That's also why on this list I would add Governor Scott Walker of Wisconsin, why I would add Governor Mike Pence of Indiana. People outside, Don, who am I missing? Other people from outside Washington.
Do you think Perry can resurrect himself from his disastrous campaign?
It looks like he's going to try. We hear that he's talking to people about raising money, and he says that he didn't get to tell his full story last time.
That's because he forgot his full story.
Yes, I'm Alvin Sykes. Welcome to Kansas City.
Thank you.
Practically every day I read The Hill, Politico, and the
That's plenty.
Time.
roll
Time.com.
call.
Yeah, Time Magazine.
Oh, okay.
And I usually read Politico second. What is, in your opinion, the difference between your Politico and the other two, and what reason should I read yours first instead of second?
Oh, good question.
Thank you,
Very
Mr.
good.
Sykes. First, I want to say how much I admire the work that you've done, and
Yes.
you brought great positive attention to Kansas City. I really admire what you've done, what you've started, what you've created. Politico operates, it's different, and that's a very astute question, because Politico operates on a different theory of the case than other media, than Time Magazine or NBC Nightly News. We have what we call the inside-out theory, and that we don't try to write our stories for everyone around the world, for a maximum audience. We write our stories for the White House Chief of Staff, for the Senator, for the campaign manager. And our theory is, which fortunately has turned out to be true, that if we're writing things that surprise, illuminate, interest the Chief of Staff, the Senator, that there will be an audience around the country and around the world that's interested in it. Something that Steve and I had chatted about this morning was that Ken Mellman, who was chairman of the Republican National Committee, was manager of President Bush's re-election campaign in 2004. Something he used to tell the staff is that in any group of 10 people around the country, there's one that the other 9 look to for advice about cars, movies, music, restaurants, and ultimately how to vote. And that's the people in this room. You're within your own circles, opinion leaders, opinion drivers, and those are the people that Politico tries to reach. We want to reach the right 100,000 people around the country, not the million.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, good evening, and welcome to Kansas City as well. Mike, or you two, David, whichever one can give us a comment or an opinion on the current famous or infamous occupant of the airport in Russia. And how do you opine that would result and how it'll impact the president's future visit to Russia? Thank you.
Great question. Go ahead.
Having spent 3 hours once in the Moscow airport, I do want to say that whether he's a traitor or a hero, he's definitely undergoing significant punishment by having to live there. It seems to me that Russia doesn't want him, so my guess is that sooner or later he'll be back in the United States. And I'm not sure the president really wants that to happen. It seems to me he's in the best of all worlds right now, where he's not doing a trial of a very polarizing and galvanizing figure, and out of sight is out of mind. And so they may want him to, what was the Tom Hanks movie, The Terminal, where the man lived there year after year? That may be their ideal game here. Do you?
Yeah, no, and those are all great points. And just today on NBC, Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina said that the U.S. should boycott the upcoming Winter Olympics in Russia in 2014 over Snowden. So everybody's hitching their star to it.
Hoping that doesn't happen. We'll get to the last question. Folks here might want to become playbookers. How does that happen?
Very kind of you. We would be excited to have you as part of the Playbook community. I would love to have that one more email be yours. On the homepage of Politico.com, it's very easy to sign up for Playbook. And one of the great things about being here is that you will get the Playbook an hour before the president does. Guaranteed.
Last question.
My question is, given the increasing income disparity we're seeing and the increasing cost of college and further education, what do you see happening as far as the young people in our country?
Yeah, thank you for a great question. And something that we think about every day is that despite the prosperity that we see around us in Washington, and David was talking about the demographics of some of the counties and jurisdictions around Washington, and despite the fact that the macro indicators clearly are heading in the right direction and arguably are good for the country, certainly better, there are a lot of places in the country with a lot of pain. There are a lot of, Politico just reported today, $1 trillion right now in student debt, and a lot of people. I'm always very like touched and worried by the stories that I read about people who are underemployed, people who are having their ambitions frustrated. And so for the media who needs to be telling those stories, illuminating the condition, explaining what's going on, and the politicians who should be doing something about it, you've put your finger on a fantastic issue. And we have one more.
I think that's a great final note.
Well, no, just do it real quick. Just,
Okay.
I'll be fast. I'll be quick.
Okay. In your introductory remarks, you mentioned that TV and the web are coming together to help us better navigate the news. Based on a recent book called Linked Data, the semantic web is currently co-evolving with geographic information systems, which is mapping technologies. In the long view, how would this affect our understanding of the news? In addition, what's the scoop that journalism and librarianship are also co-evolving?
Yeah, and I have a great answer to that, and that is that the people in this room, the young people that we were talking about, are the people who are going to figure out what's next for political journalism and all kinds of journalism. We started a Politico website, and so we think in terms of a website, but it's young people, it's our interns, our reporters, people who are in law school right now who are going to figure out what's next and should, and that's why one day we'll be working for you.
I like that. That's a great note. Mike, thank you for that.
Thank you for great
Wonderful
questions.
thing.